Okay, very interesting week in terms of what happened in Crown Heights. In Crown Heights, Brooklyn, this whole story with the tunnels. Obviously, a lot of people came with different. A lot of people have different responses to it, so I'm going to try to give my historical perspective. I am a self-titled Crown Heights historian, and there's a difference between Chabad historian and Crown Heights historian. So, very, very briefly, who are these people that live in Crown Heights today? The Jewish community that lives in Crown Heights today are from the Hasidic community of chassidim that are Chabad Lubavitch chassidim. So very briefly, 6 million Jews in America. 80% of them are secular Jews. You wouldn't recognize them unless they told you that they were Jewish. And like famous Jews, Jerry Seinfeld, Mark Zuckerberg, whatever, Jon Stewart. They're secular American Jews. You only know that they're Jewish because they told you or by their last name, but outwardly they're just regular everyday Americans. Then about 20% of Jews are more traditional. About 10% of Jews would be called Orthodox, which means that they adhere to the laws of the Torah and Jewish law. And about 5, maybe 6% of Jews in America are chassidim. Chassidim are pious, which means that they are not only dedicated, not only outwardly Jewish, not only dedicated to Judaism, and not only do they keep the law, their whole life is dedicated to Judaism. And there's about 20 different branches of Hasidim in America. They basically come from the different places that they were in Europe. So, and then based on the place where they were in Europe, they will be in America. So Hasidim that came out of Hungary are right now in Williamsburg and in Monroe, upstate. Hasidim that came out of Poland and Hungary, but also mostly Poland, are right now in Borough Park. And Hasidim that came out of Russia, which is mostly Chabad, they're in Crown Heights, that they're based out of Crown Heights, and then they have Chabad centers of outreach throughout the world. Now, what are the basis of Hasidus? Why, in other words, why in one... There's a lot to be said because there's a lot of history, but you can look it up basically online. But in short, Hasidim are followers of their Rebbe because 200 years ago, until 200 years ago, you had, in order to be a rabbi in a town, in order to be a rabbi of your town, you needed to be approved by the government. But then there were pogroms against the Jews in the mid-1600s, and a lot of Jewish communities were devastated. They were totally wiped out. So the Jews that moved back to the area said, okay, we're going to restart Jewish life, but we're not going to have things the way they used to be, because if you're going to have the rabbinate hired by the government, then you're going to have an issue. Your issue is going to be corruption, because they're going to be able to control, let's say, who gets the contract or the kosher stamp, basically the contract for the wine or for the matzah or for anything else like that. So they then came up with grassroots groups who gathered around their own leaders, which were called Rebbes, their own little leaders, that they used to do a different sort of form of Judaism. It wasn't one rabbi that was in one town, it was more one traveling rabbi that had his followers. And that was the origin of Hasidus that started in Hungary. It started in Ukraine. And then you had famous people, Baal Shem Tov, and then you had different branches of Hasidim that from different places around the world. But basically the reason why Hasidic groups are not obsessed, obsessed or follow their leader is because it came as a grassroots movement of a leader following these leading these Hasidim through the dark times in Europe. Now, there was also something else that's going on. That the reason why Hasidus started is because Jewish people back in the day, the ones that didn't suffer from the pogroms were Jewish people from Poland. They were very learned and they were aristocratic. So, being that they were aristocratic, they looked down at the. I get rid of this glare because it's annoying me too. Jews from Poland had okay. There was another reason why Hasidus started many years ago. It was a grassroots movement because Jews from Poland did much better financially, and therefore, if they did better financially, they were able to study more. Now, in general, when it comes culturally to Jewish people, in certain cultures, the physically stronger you are or the tougher you are, the better you are. Many years ago, like in the 600, 700, or I don't actually know when exactly, but many years ago in the Islamic world, the biggest poet was the most respected person. And that actually, so that was that. That actually affected the reason why Jewish some of the Jewish prayers, written beautiful Hebrew poetries because it was affected by the poetry of the Islamic world, of the idea from the Islamic world that poetry is one of the most important things. Then, like, basically, who's the coolest kid in class? So in some places, the coolest kid in class is the kid with the most muscles. Who's the coolest kid in class? Some places, the most money. Who's the coolest kid in class? In some places, well, by the Jews, it's the smartest person. At least when I went to school, it was if you were smart, you were like the top. Back then in the 1700s, 1800s in Poland, it was the same thing. The smartest kid always married the daughter of the wealthiest person. Now, if you were from Poland, you did well in life, you had money, you were able to study for many, many years, and you had the leisure to do that. Jews from Ukraine and Russia and Belarus in that area did not have a lot of money, so therefore they did not, they had to start working at the age of 14. They weren't able to go to school for that many years. They weren't very learned. Therefore, they were looked down at by other Jewish people, by other Jews that did do well. And then these Hasidic rabbis, these little sort of self-created leaders came around, not government-sponsored, that this basically, I'm trying to give you the foundation of why this dedication from the leader from the followers, from the chassidim, which are followers, to the Rebbe, why it's so strong emotionally. Because they sort of led him through difficult times, and that set the precedent of Hasidus over the next 200 years. Now, today, fast forward 7 generations later, in terms of different type of Hasidus that from Europe, Chabad is unique in the sense that, simply put, so the two biggest Hasidus right now in America would be Satmar and Lubavitch. Chabad is Chabad Lubavitch, same thing. Satmar and Lubavitch. Satmar is a very, very big Hasidus. But also, the thing with Satmar is that they're self-created. They don't need their Rebbe very much. Without the Satmar, now the Satmar Rebbe did set up things incredibly well in Brooklyn when he came. I think he had financial problems in Israel. They brought him over and they said, no, you're going to be the Rebbe here in America. Not I think, I heard that directly. You're going to be our Rebbe here in America. He was a survivor from World War II, but he was a great man in terms of being a leader, and he set up the community. They said immediately, he says, when person has $1, he helps out the other person with $1. Everyone helps each other out. That's why if you ever hang out with chassidim, Satmar chassidim in general, they're very kind to each other. I personally witnessed that and experienced that when I hung out with Satmar chassidim that were sort of a little bit more wayward, that went to camping trips. And you could just see that the way they help each other out, the way they work with each other, the way they are kind to each other is a very much direct. It's great to know history because it's direct result out of what the Satmar Rebbe set up 1947 or 48, I think that's when he came from Israel to maybe early 50s, from Israel to America to set up the Satmar community in Williamsburg. So that's just one perspective on one of the biggest Satmar Hasidic communities around. The other big Hasidic community that is in America is the very famous one, CHABAD Lubavitch. Now, Chabad had two options. When the previous Rebbe passed away in 1950, there was two options who should become the Rebbe. The Rebbe had 3 daughters. One was killed during the war. 2 survived with their husbands and they lived in America. One was the Rashag, Shmuel Garari, which was supposed to be the heir apparent. He was supposed to be the next Rebbe of Lubavitch, that thought of, because he was very close to his father-in-law. Then there was the current, or the latest Lubavitch Rebbe that was dressed more modern. They thought of him as someone that would never really be up to be Rebbe. What ended up happening is he did become Rebbe. So if they would have gone with the other brother-in-law, Chabad today would have been maybe 5-6 blocks in Flatbush or Borough Park somewhere, and it would have been one of these like offshoot Hasidic groups that you never really hear of, that have like Tanya or whatever. Because the Rebbe became Rebbe, he took a fledgling. Chabad was done in 1950. After World War II, Chabad was done. It was over. But he somehow took a movement of a really scattered, fledgling, totally beat up movement, because the last time Chabad Lubavitch was unified was in 1913 or 14. Sorry about that. People always tell me I appreciate your support and whatever. I'm not there to support people. I'm here to lift people up and help them with their music or with their art. If I lift you up, you lift me up. Then they say, thank you so much for your support. Am I that supportive? No, just get it done like this. I like when people express themselves. Maybe it is supportive. Next. Anyway, referencing a message I got. Okay. In 1950, in 1951, the Rebbe became Rebbe. So in 1951, the Rebbe, known as Menachem Mendel Schneerson, the Rebbe, became, he took over his father-in-law. His father-in-law was the sixth Lubavitch Rebbe. Then he became the leader of the CHABAD Lubavitch movement. The chassidim chased him for a year, and he didn't want to do it. He was naturally, and he said about himself, he's not an outgoing person, and he was also a very truthful person. He's very high. I can't really describe the Rebbe because there's so many books about it. Look it up yourself. But basically, I'll say that without the Rebbe becoming Rebbe, Chabad would have totally disintegrated. It would have been like this nothing group. Because of that, because of the helplessness and impossibility of Lubavitch, of Chabad Lubavitch, of Lubavitchers, because of that, and because of without the Rebbe, they would have been literally nothing. Therefore, you have this dedication. There's also another reason, but you have this dedication from chassidim towards the Rebbe, like you don't have in any other chassidic group. So you have it. You have certain groups of chassidim that are very into the Rebbe, but even Skver, and I've seen here in Israel, with other people, with great Rebbes, the chassidim don't go crazy over the Rebbe like they did over the Lubavitch Rebbe. And the reason is two reasons. Number one, they're coming from Russia. Now, Russia is not like Poland. It's not like Hungary. Russia was Stalinism. They had that sort of, they had that intense dedication to the leaders. That's the culture they're coming from, not comparing the two, but they had that idea. So Chabad is based on that model. It's like culturally they're based on the model. So, for example, if the Jews left America today to settle in a new place in Argentina, you'll have American-style Judaism, and American-style Judaism that lasts, that blend into Argentinian, let's say, local culture. Same thing as with Lubavitch. There had Russian-style sort of. They always had dictatorships and this total dedication to their leaders type thing. That culture that Lubavitch was built on is also another reason that Chassidim are so dedicated to the Rebbe. But also, honestly, without the Rebbe, there would have been nothing. They would have disappeared. There would have been, again, a little Chassidus somewhere in Borough Park or Crown Heights, Flatbush, and it would have been nothing like it was today. And then the third final real reason is because the Rebbe was just an incredibly great man. There's nothing to compare it to. Even the Rebbe's enemies agree. Even his detractors agree that he was an unbelievably, incredibly great man. People from around the world came to see him. So he did earn that as well. He was also being not an outgoing person, a more of a private, internal person that has greatness to them. It's a whole mixture of a bunch of different things. That reason why Chassidim are so dedicated to the Rebbe. But in Lubavitch, you have it not just that the Chassidim are dedicated to the Rebbe like light. It's like heavy, extra heavy. Plus, then the Rebbe took the movement of Lubavitch movement from a couple of people that some people survived from Russia. Some people survived from Shanghai. Some people were in America already. Some people happened to be living in the neighborhood, and everyone left, but they happened to just stick around. Then there was the teshoova movement. We'll talk about that in a moment. But the bottom line is that the Rebbe took this little fledgling movement that literally was about to disappear, and he turned into a worldwide movement that not only survived and thrived, did well for themselves, they also changed the face of the Jewish world. They changed the face of Jewish pride in the Jewish world throughout the world. They changed the face of Judaism throughout the world by opening up outreach centers. Plus, the Rebbe had this idea, like right now, after October 7th, there's a lot of anti-Semitism. So what are people thinking normally? Okay, we got to stick together. We got to protect ourselves because we don't want the same thing that happened 70 years ago to happen now. So we want to be smart about it and make sure to focus inward and talk to each other, like focus on each other, have Jewish unity, and screw the world because they're not going to be there for us, and let's take care of each other. That makes sense. After World War II, they had that times a million because just 6 million people were killed and the world literally didn't give a shit, like legit. So everyone had this idea of let's focus on our own community, rebuild our own thing, and the Rebbe said yes, just the opposite. He said, no, we're in America, and you stood American culture very much, and he said, let's reach out to other Jewish people to create Jewish pride. And there was a lot of opposition, obviously. Now it's a cool thing, but back then there was a lot of opposition. Like, what are you doing? We're after the Holocaust. Let's just focus on our community to build up. And other Hasidic communities built up tremendous communities. It was Satmar or Belz or Bobov and Borough Park and other places. They did build up. They created a lot of wealth. And again, I'll talk about different Hasidicities, why some are wealthier and some are poorer. But I'm trying to say, the Rebbe had an outlook. He did not focus on the Holocaust either as well. He never barely ever mentioned it. He had this like he's someone that it's very hard to describe who the Rebbe is, especially growing up in Crown Heights, because I'm born and raised in Crown Heights, if I didn't say that in the beginning of the video. So I have this like emotional attachment to the Rebbe, regardless of where I am in the world, regardless if I'm living in Bushwick with non-Jews, or if I'm out at Burning Man, or if I'm living in China for a few years. I'll still have this emotional attachment to the Rebbe. That's what happens when you grow up in Crown Heights. So it's sometimes hard to describe who he is, but there's a million books out there and articles that could describe him. But I was trying to explain to you why Chabad chassidim are so crazy about the Rebbe. And he could walk into a room with 1,000 people, like 10,000 people in the room, and they'll make a room, like they make, he'll walk through and they'll make a pathway for him, like utmost respect and admiration, and sort of it goes into a frenzy even at times. Okay, so that's the difference in Chabad. Now, Chabad Chabad Lubavitch. Chabad Lubavitch compared to other Chassidus is another thing. It's like this. You have a kind of unique thing going on. There's a couple different differences. Other Chassidus are very monolith, come from one specific place. Satmar sort of had a monolith dictatorship in Williamsburg and in Monroe. They were extremely strict on their followers. They took the trauma that they had from the Holocaust and literally put it on their kids. It's I don't want to get into that because it's just the amount of damage that was done was tremendous. While they were building themselves up, getting themselves out of a hole, building themselves up wealth wise and stuff like that, it was terrible trauma. It was terrible trauma within the community going on from one generation to the next, and finally now 3 generations after the Holocaust, people are focusing on different forms of healing. But with that, they started building wealth for themselves. So think about this: in Hungary, the Satmar Chassidim lived in Hungary for 400 years, and they lived pretty well. They didn't until World War II. They dealt with. There was anti-Semitism, but they didn't deal with such crazy oppression like they dealt with in Russia. So they did have abilities to build up businesses, and they did a lot of smuggling back and forth because the borders used to change a lot. So they kept on smuggling. That was a big business by chassidim, or by the Jews in Hungary that later formed the Satmar Chassidus. They were very organized. They're also Hungarian in culture, so which means that they have to have the nicest of everything. You have to be of a certain sophistication and a member of the world. It's a very interesting, unique situation that Jews of Hungary then came to build the Satmar Chassidus of today. People that are outside the community have no idea. All they see is people with curls, and they own a lot of real estate, and it's so much more complex than that, as always everything is. They came to America and they immediately started buying real estate. Now, there's 2 neighborhoods. There's Satmar from Hungary that settled in Williamsburg, and then there is Chabad of Russia that settled in Crown Heights, and you had 2 separate stories that went on. In Russia, the Chassidim in Russia Jews in Russia dealt with 200 years or more of oppression, of inability to make money. They lived in the Pale of Settlement. Over there, if you became a pauper, they used to joke around that we'll work our way up to becoming a pauper, because there was very little money. There was obviously oppression. There was also very little money. So therefore, culturally, they never thought about making money. When they came to Crown Heights, they didn't let go of that culture. That's why most people that came to Crown Heights didn't even buy houses. They didn't buy real estate. There was a big fight over real estate as time went on, as the neighborhood changed. But initially, they were like, okay, we'll live here, we'll rent out. We're probably going to be out of here for another few years anyway. So it's like as if you're buying something, if you're Jewish, if you're buying something in Israel that may soon become land that goes to Lebanon, or the army may take it over in order to protect you from Lebanon, and you're living in a hut. Would you consider buying the hut and the land? No, you'll rent it out for $200 a month, because that makes sense, because you think you're going anywhere. Jews originally that came to Crown Heights were like, okay, the Chassidim that originally came to Crown Heights, they were like, okay, we're here now, we're going to rent, we're not going to buy anything. They didn't have the ability, they didn't have the culture or the outlook to think that we're going to purchase real estate and hold on to it long term. That's why, besides that, they didn't have the culture or the ability or to think about wealth, because wealth, as we know, is not so much smarts. It is, but it's not as so much smarts and conviction and focus. It's also the culture and feeling like you deserve and allowing for it, which they did not have as much in Crown Heights that they did in other neighborhoods. This came into effect later on when Lubavitchers moved so they moved to Crown Heights officially in 1940, but the community became distinctly Lubavitch in the 1960s when there was white flight. All the white people left, African Americans moved in. then there became fights over housing for many years in Crown Heights. But there was schools that were going out of every even synagogues. A lot of synagogues were going to be sold to churches. Every synagogue to hold on to was a big fight. There were schools that were lost because there was a lot of infighting, disorganization. Again, culturally, they didn't understand. There was no money around then. There was poverty, not just physically, it was poverty like sort of mentally. At one point, the Rebbe challenged us chassidim. He said 1956 is Purim time. Purim is a time that, Purim is Purim. I guess at this point, if you're not Jewish, you have no idea what I'm talking about anyway. The Rebbe challenged us chassidim at a gathering, at a Purim gathering, and he said, whoever wants to become wealthy, whoever wants to take on the idea of becoming wealthy should raise their hand, and only 3 people raised their hand out of the whole room, which shows that money and finance was not on top of their mind. And then CHABAD Lubavitch chassidim only started making money about 10-15 years ago. Satmar they focused on wealth and on real estate right when they came in the 1950s. So right now it's like 60, 70 years later, and you have a tremendously wealthy community in Satmar that gives tremendous amount of charity and helps each other out a lot. Obviously they have their challenges, which, there's nothing, I would say there's nothing better or nothing more better than a healed chassid. Because if a person in the Satmar, any community focuses on healing, they become the best of the best. Because chassidim in general kick ass, so once they focus on healing, they become tremendous. But if they don't, there's a lot of challenges that many other people talk about, so we'll let them cover that. Anyway, back to CHABAD Lubavitch. So they came to America in 1940. They bought this building called 770. The reason why they bought this building called 770, which I'll probably show you in the video a picture of it. They built it because the previous Lubavitch Rebbe went to jail. He was jailed by the communists. He was beat up in jail, and he had issues that he couldn't walk. He needed an elevator. So they found this upscale Crown Heights neighborhood. And they bought this building in 1940. It was, okay, there's many different stories about what the story of 770 was. 770 Eastern Parkway, first there was other buildings there. First there was people living there in the 1890s. There was a random, I found in the newspaper, a random person, a really sad story that their kid passed came to the doctor, and it came to the newspaper. That was a little hut, because Eastern Parkway was cut through, was dug out the 1870. So from 1870 till Crown Heights started being built in 1903. So until the developers started in Crown Heights South, which is south of Eastern Parkway, which is Lubavitch, Crown Heights of today, so there were plenty of people. There was Eastern Parkway, and then there was like sort of some avenues being cut through. But bottom line is there was an empty vacant land, so you had a lot of people called squatters. So you had squatters in the 1890s on 770 today. Then from what I understand, so I saw so far, is that you did have 2 buildings built. One Jewish ADD doctor guy came, and he's like, okay, I'm going to build myself a big building. He had big vision. You know those people who like ADD with big vision, but they can't follow through? So he had big vision. He built himself this beautiful, beautiful building, really nice. And his office is downstairs. He lived upstairs. With an elevator and everything. It was a top-notch building. He didn't pay the architect, so the architect sued him. He didn't pay his taxes. He built it in 1932 during a Great Depression also, which just shows you like either he was a very, very good doctor that made a lot of money, or he just thought he dreamt too big for him to, he built this building in 1932. He didn't pay taxes 1932 to 1938. He went to the hospital. He did illegal abortions, which again, it specifically which doctor did an illegal abortion in general in Brooklyn or in New York City or in America those days, I don't know. But it shows on the mindset of what type of person he is. Doctor, I think his name was Levine or something, Levin. D.K. Levin, so David something Khan. So I don't remember his name. Anyway, we could look it up. And then he had someone died on his operating table. So he was sued for malpractice, and he had many different problems. Basically, the building was taken away by the government. In 1939, 1940, the previous Lubavitch Rebbe came, and he said, okay, I'm going to buy the building. This story I don't have proof for because I can't really find it anywhere, but there were other people who was living in New York, who was living in Crown Heights those days. Which Jewish people were living in Crown Heights those days? So Jews came to Crown Heights with the development of Crown Heights. They were developers themselves, and they also, people basically came to Crown Heights after World War I. After World War I is when they started moving in a lot. before World War One, Crown Heights was built in different stages. You had Spotless Town built in 1903, which is Union Street, and you had President Street. Then every few years you had a different street being developed. But after World War One, so 1918, whatever that era, Jews started moving into Crown Heights en masse, and they lived there. And first it was, I think it was basically descendants of Russian Jews. Actually, no. Crown Heights North there was German Jews. They opened a Reform temple. Crown Heights South was Russian Jews, a mixture of all different ones, but basically descendants of Russian Jews who did well for themselves. So they came from East New York, from Brownsville, more like Brownsville, and then also like Williamsburg and Bed-Stuy, and they moved to this brand new neighborhood called Crown Heights. They were called All Rightniks because if you ask them how they're doing, they say we are all right. So they're called All Rightniks. They made a little bit more money, so they're able to live in this upscale neighborhood, which became eventually known as Crown Heights. Then, so those days, even you had some Orthodox synagogues, and mostly conservative or mostly secular Jews that didn't want to have anything to do. They definitely in 1940 they were terribly embarrassed of Jews that were still religious and outwardly Jewish. They just wanted to blend into mainstream American society. So therefore, so much so they didn't want to complain during the Holocaust about all the killing that's going on because they didn't want to stick out as Jewish people. That's the type of Jewish people you had basically in Crown Heights. And when chassidim came in 1940, the previous Rebbe came in 1940 and wanted to buy this building that the government took away because of taxes, there was a small outcry from local Jews like saying, there goes the neighborhood. And in fact, it went. In fact, no. So they moved there, and then after World War II, other chassidim started moving in, and there was a big influx of chassidim. So then Crown Heights became sort of an international neighborhood of secular American Jews. You have some Reform, some conservative, some working Jews, some chassidim, and some just everyday learned. You have sort of a whole spectrum of Jewish people in Crown Heights in the 1940s. Then, why am I saying this? Okay. So the previous Rebbe bought that building. Chabad was really, really small. So till 1960, they stayed in this little building in 770. Then a guy by the name of Klein, who was a non-Lubavitch chassid, I think his name was Klein, he bought 788, 784, and 788, two apartment buildings that were built in 1912 that they would call the Parkway. Those two were sort of like nice apartment buildings, called elegant apartment buildings. That's what they're advertised for $34 a month in rent per apartment. And they had bought those two buildings and decided to expand 770. Then you have a third building, which is behind everything, that was bought by Jimmy Garari to build a mikvah, and also as a Weibershul, ladies section for 770. That was purchased probably in the early 70s, late 60s, early 70s. That's when a lot of the property in Crown Heights was going from the white flight people that were leaving. They were selling it or giving it away kind of to whoever was taking it. And because you did not have this culture of buying real estate in Crown Heights, you had some purchases, but a lot of it went to either the African American community or to just random people whoever purchased it. But basically, it became a fight between Lubavitch and the black community, which developed later on, which became an issue later on. Yeah, a lot of black churches bought real estate then also because they saw the opportunity to purchase it. So you have three buildings right now that became that are called 770, but in reality they're three separate buildings, and they're basically they're being built in order to expand 770, because there's always a question of, okay, so the Rebbe can come down, the Rebbe will have a farbrengen, and there'll be a lot of people there, but there's always an issue with crowding on the holidays. So Yontif, Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, or Simchas Torah, you have thousands and thousands of people. The room was totally filled, and the room was totally jam-packed. So now we would like to expand 770. Also, another thing about Lubavitch is that they're constantly conquering and expanding. So while they have all these issues with poverty and with poverty and et cetera, under the Rebbe's leadership, they had this idea from they would sing nation after nation, we were conquering. So it was always like, we're going to conquer. So therefore, we're going to expand 770. We're not actually going to keep it small. So we went from one building to the next. And my grandfather was very involved. My father was very involved in building the buildings. There used to be stores on Kingston Avenue, and they were all taken away in order to expand 770. So you can see a picture here of the stores before and the stores after. Well, if the audio changes, too bad. Can't work with the other app. Um, Now you have an issue with. Now you have an issue with. Okay, now you have a question of Lubavitch came in 1940. The Rebbe became Rebbe in 1950. Started rebuilding the Jewish world. He started telling people that you have to go out and create, spread Judaism for other Jews that are secular Jews, that you have to teach them about Judaism, spread Jewish pride, Jewish adherence to, adherence to Jewish law, etc., etc. He went to just the opposite direction of everyone else of his other Hasidic leaders. He started this concept called Jewish outreach. Now, who did he reach out to? A lot of it was college campuses. Early Chabad rabbis just went to regular synagogues, and then eventually there were two people, Shlomo Kalbach and the other guy who started the idea of a Chabad house. It's a very controversial thing to say because I don't know if it would have happened with them or without them. I'm kind of saying it kind of comedically, but the idea of a Chabad house itself came out. So in other words, until late 50s, Chabad rabbis would go out, these emissaries, shluchim would go out, they basically become a rabbi of an established synagogue. Then eventually they started building their own Chabad houses. In other words, we're going to create our own synagogue that's on the with basically a from synagogue, an Orthodox synagogue, shul that that welcomes people from the outside world. So you'll have davening in Hebrew, but explanations probably in English, or you'll announce the page numbers, which is something that you normally wouldn't see at a from shul, or many, many other reasons that basically the rabbi's there to explain to Jews, to secular American Jews, what's going on here and what Judaism is about and their experience of Judaism, etc., etc. So you had that starting in the late 1950s. Now, you had an interesting thing that happened in Crown Heights. You had sort of a twofold thing. So normally a poor rabbi, a newly minted married Chabad chassid from that, either born and raised in Crown Heights, which in the late 50s nobody was born and raised in Crown Heights, but let's say it came from Russia, or later on born and raised in Crown Heights, and you go out there and you start reaching out to secular American Jews. You will think that these secular American Jews are really cool people, especially if they're established financially. Then they have money. Then they're really the coolest, and they can speak English well, and they have fun, and they're not living this lifestyle, this Hasidic lifestyle that you're living. So you would sort of treat them as better than, because you're like, these are the people we have to reach out to. These are the people that we hold in high esteem, and they're maybe professionals also, professional doctor, lawyer, or anything else. They're professionals, business owners. They're really cool. I'm coming from the Chabad world, and we're trying to bring these people into Judaism. So we're going to teach them about Judaism, but there's also this awe of people that, secular American Jews are sort of cooler, especially if they're rich, especially if they have some money or whatever, like that. So they're sort of better than. Plus, they're coming as like, they're coming, if they're going to come to the Chabad house, they're coming as, how do you explain it? They're coming as special guests. They're coming as wanted guests in order to create this Chabad house or this Chabad community. Then some of the people actually joined Chabad houses, and then you join Lubavitch, or they joined Crown Heights, and then they moved to Crown Heights, and they joined Chabad in Crown Heights. So, but then they would come from someone that was better than to someone that was less than, because what they were doing is joining an established Chabad community. Why were they less than? Well, naturally, you'll have, generally those days, all Orthodox groups, all Hasidic groups, all Orthodox groups were one thing. They were all rejecting to their kids, rejecting to their students, rejecting. It just wasn't a very pleasant place to be. I don't care what anyone else says. Crown Heights in the 1960s, if you were in school in Crown Heights in the 1960s, you would have to learn to defend yourself. It was a Jewish school, so you had to learn to defend yourself with wit, not with physical. That didn't come to that. Other places used to beat the crap out of their kids. Over here, everything was rejecting. Different communities abused their children in different ways. I'll give another video about that. But therefore, Baal Teshuva in the 60s, someone that came from outside the Chabad world and decided to join the Chabad world, well, if they were a secular American Jew that came from the outside, joining this one-time, hold on one second. Joining this established, joining this, coming one time to the Chabad house from, this cool kid with long hair coming to try to figure out what this Judaism thing is about. It's like, wow, you're the star here because we're going to show you how beautiful Judaism is. Once they moved to Crown Heights and said, oh, we actually want to be part of the Crown Heights community, then they weren't dealing with their Chabad house, with their Chabad rabbi nearby. They were contending with people that were still in Crown Heights, many people that actually came from Russia. So they did definitely relate to people who are coming from, I don't know, New Jersey, Kentucky, California, the secular American Jews that, in other words, a hippie Jew that came in the 60s that decided, hey, you know what? I'm very turned on by this Chabad situation. I'm going to move to Crown Heights and just dedicate my whole life to Lubavitch. They weren't exactly welcomed by the established community that much, even though the week before or the era before they were treated like royalty in the Chabad house that they came. So now they want to move to Crown Heights. Now you're a Baal Tshuva. Now you're sort of someone that's maybe trying too hard. Also, maybe you definitely don't know the language. You don't know Yiddish. You're barely learning Hebrew, and you definitely culturally don't get the language. You just don't get it because how are you supposed to get it? People that came from Russia a lot of times are traumatized people. My other grandfather, not the one who built 770, the other grandfather was actually a very, very popular person because he came from Russia and he was actually an optimistic person. He was a very happy person. So he was like a breath of fresh air. But most people that came from Russia back then, most chassidim came from Russia. Maybe some of them were passionate. I'm sure a lot of them were passionate, or they had that burn, or they had that survival thing. They didn't go through the Holocaust, but they went through Russia, which is Siberia, which is much longer than Holocaust is one big, for Jews in Hungary, Holocaust is a bang over the head with tremendous what do you call it? Trauma. But for Russia, there was dealing with trauma for 200 years already, dealing in the Pale of Settlement and stuff like that. The people that are coming out of that, they're not going to exactly communicate or not going to exactly connect with the local hippie turned Lubavitcher. So there was an issue of sort of this class thing that happened in Crown Heights between established Lubavitchers and newly minted Lubavitchers. That were essentially American kids that came and donned the Lubavitch garb, and decided to join full force into the Chabad community. There wasn't really an established, there wasn't much of an established welcoming situation for them. So they had to find their own way. They coalesced together. There were some people here and there that would give classes and try to be leaders for them, but they weren't really doted on as much as you would think, being that Chabad is looking to make people Baal Tshuva, make people religious. So they weren't really doted on, and they sort of just coalesced around each other and created their own sub-community within the Crown Heights community of established Chabad. And then there was people that were going out to be shluchim all over, emissaries all over America. And then there was the Baal Tshuva movement within Crown Heights themselves. They came in the 60s. They got married, mostly to each other. Baal Tshuva guy, Baal Tshuva girl, established Chabad guy, established Chabad girl. They wouldn't marry each other really. When did this issue come ahead? They started coming in the 60s, late 60s, early 70s. So you're looking at 60s and 70s. So you're talking about, let's say 1965, so 70, 85. So by the time 1985, they have kids that are marriageable age. Yeah, late 80s, early 90s, they have kids that are marriageable age. Now, the Zalman Futterfaststein, who is a verbrennte Lubavitcher, is going to say his daughter, my daughter, for Robert Feldman Schottenstein, whatever. I'm just making up names right now. That's a Baal Tshuva that reads Yiddish weird, that reads the davening weird, and maybe trying a little too hard, and whatever. No, hell no, I'm not marrying our kids. I'm never marrying their kids. So it became a split in the community that was felt a lot for the first 20 years that they came mid 60s to mid to late 60s, 60s, 70s to 80s, 90s. So it was felt in the beginning, but when their kids came up to get married, they weren't marrying each other. They didn't want to marry each other. Mostly there was rejection from the established Chabad community towards the Baal Tshuva community, and it was felt by the Baal Tshuva community. it was felt by them, and that's when you had a sort of a community within a community that was leaderless. Why they were leaderless, I don't know. Who was supposed to take care of them, I don't know. But essentially, that they were leaderless. Crown Heights itself also was leaderless in a way, because the Lubavitch Rebbe, the Rebbe didn't really focus on Crown Heights local things. Once in a while he would mix in when absolutely necessary. But even when the riots happened, the Rebbe didn't come. The Rebbe didn't comment on it. The Rebbe every night gave a sicha about going out and spreading light. The Rebbe did not focus on the riots. The Rebbe did not 1991 the riots. The Rebbe did not focus on let's protect ourselves. If this was Satmar, oh my God, they would be arranging squads they would be talking to politicians, they would be dealing with police. There would be a whole arrangement over there. But the Rebbe didn't focus on that. People don't know why. The Rebbe said he's not a leader of Crown Heights. He's a leader of they didn't say he's a leader. It doesn't mix into the issues of Crown Heights. Leaders of Crown Heights community should do that. But given the fact that they came from where they came from and the lack of cohesion within the Crown Heights community, there was just disorganization. There weren't a lot of big doers, and anyone that was a big doer and entrepreneurial went on shlichus. So there was a brain drain going on as well. They became emissaries. So they moved out of Crown Heights. So the big brain drain, and there was very little slow start to anything happening, and therefore when the riots happened, people cried victim, which they were, because it was essentially a pogrom or whatever you established. It was essentially a riot against Jewish people. It was the culmination of many years of anti-Semitism from the black community, but the Rebbe's involvement in that was not directly into what was going on in Crown Heights. So even in the Crown Heights community itself, there was a lack of leadership. Now, the Rebbe spoke about many different things that came up over the years that was proved that while they were happening, everyone else in the Jewish community yelled about it, made fun of it, derided it, but eventually came around to agreeing with it. That's how Lubavitch saw things. So, for example, reach out to other Jewish people. People obliterated Chabad because of it. They were like, what the hell are you talking about? Doing outreach? It doesn't make sense. That just concept doesn't make any sense. Chabad, you put someone as a chutzah to reach out to other people, to spread. Chabad's always about, from Russia, it's always about spreading and conquering. When the Rebbe came up with that idea, people were like, what the hell are you talking about? This is after the Holocaust, we have to focus inward. But the Rebbe was proven right, because that became an established thing. The other communities started taking on, and that changed the face of Jewry. The Rebbe came up with the idea of Yehudi, of making sure that people that come to Israel should have a religious conversion, or stuff like that. First, there was a lot of opposition to that, and then in the Lubavitch experience, the Rebbe was proven right. Time and time again, the Rebbe was proven right with these things. So when the Rebbe focused on Moshiach coming, the concept of Moshiach, the Rebbe spoke about it since day one. Since he became Rebbe in 1951, he focused on Moshiach immediately. He said, with the seventh generation of Galus, seventh generation of his exile, we're going to be the final generation of his exile, and we're going to have Moshiach is going to come, the Messiah is going to come, he's going to usher in a new era of peace, of tranquility, of great things for Jewish people. And the Rebbe always spoke about a personal Moshiach, of personal freedom, of personal freedom, basically the idea of sobriety, of freedom, of realness and peace and all that stuff. The Rebbe said we are the last generation of being in Galus, last generation of being in exile, first generation of Gula, first generation of revelation. The Rebbe was basically talking about that this is going to be the generation of healing. He was foreseeing the idea of generation of healing. He didn't say it in those words, but that's my personal translation of it. The bottom line is, the Rebbe spoke about Moshiach a lot. He never spoke about who is Moshiach, but he said we are the generation of Moshiach. Now, in Jewish culture, every generation has their own Moshiach. That's the belief in. In other words, it's been this way for 2,000 years, since the exile of the Second Temple. When they came up, I think they came up with the idea of Messiah and towards the end of the First Temple. I'm not sure exactly when, I don't remember. But every generation says, okay, this person's the Moshiach of his generation. There have been false messiahs as well along the way. But the Chabad Chassidim said that, of course, if there's Moshiach is going to come in this generation, it's going to be the Rebbe, because look how he changed the face of the Jewish people. So they started coming up with that idea. The Rebbe personally said, you cannot identify who Moshiach is. We're just talking about the concept. But slowly but surely, this Moshiach movement built over many years, and mainstream Crown Heitzers got very involved with Moshiach. Some of the emissaries around the world got involved with Moshiach, but they all collectively knew that the Rebbe is Moshiach. In their eyes, they collectively knew and decided and knew that the Rebbe is Moshiach. And But you had, so politically, you had this group, though, this unattended group of Balchuvas that lived in Crown Heights, unattended group of Balchuvas lived in Crown Heights that were sort of the basis and foundation of this Moshiach movement. Now, in 1992, the Rebbe had a stroke, which was devastating for the community, because here you have someone that you completely leaned on until now, or relied on until now, that was the source of everything. There was a source of everything in terms of stimulation and fun and what to do and what the next step is and all that stuff. And the Rebbe used to gatherings every weekend, especially after his wife passed away in 1988. But here the Rebbe had a stroke, so it was a very, very difficult 2 years for chassidim, because here the person, the source of everything, that the reason what you do is not only, it's like I wouldn't call it ironic. It's terrible. It was like sort of an ongoing tragedy that he couldn't speak and he couldn't express himself. It was just things were a very big mess. And then the Rebbe passed away in 1994. So what you had then was other people stepped in and took this idea of Moshiach, and also politically took this idea of mainstream Crown Heights that was leaderless until then, because even though they had the Rebbe as a leader, but wasn't the direct leader of the neighborhood didn't have leaders, they had terrible leaders, whoever was in the leadership position. And you had the Balchuva movement, which was also definitely leaderless and was kind of rejected by mainstream Chabad. Not rejected, but sort of like treated a bit like underdog, or like, I wouldn't call second-class citizen, but not respected as peers, and people didn't want their kids, were not going to marry their kids. So that became the foundation of the Moshiach movement. Okay, so that's, again, it's all my take. Some people will watch this video and argue, but that's my take. Now, enter people from, now, there was this ongoing resentment towards the establishment of Chabad, not towards the Rebbe, but to the establishment of people that the Rebbe hired, namely Rabbi Krinsky and other people. The Rebbe hired very professional people to be the leaders of Chabad. In 1985, there was a fight over books, Svarim, there was a whole issue. The Rebbe redid and rebranded Chabad as legally that you can't just call yourself Chabad. So all of a sudden, Merkaz Le'an Chinuch, Guch, whatever it is, those organizations they were the establishment. They were 770 Eastern Parkway upstairs. They had the offices, they had the power. Now that the Rebbe passed away, you had the disbursement of power, because you had this growing resentment towards the establishment, which was led by a very well posh, soft-spoken, but professional rabbi who didn't speak Yiddish that like a regular Lubavitch, or he came from the outside, he came from Boston. The Rebbe told him, gave him a tie when he was in the 1950s. The Rebbe gave him a tie and he said, with this you're going to become a mensch, and you should work for me as my driver and also as my sort of representative, legal representative. So you had a growing resentment towards those people. I'm not totally exactly sure why, but basically there was a growing resentment towards, there was a leaderless Crown Heights through the Balchuva movement and through mainstream Crown Heights. So they were resentful towards this sort of American, soft-spoken Bostonian who was proper, so they saw that as condescending, and there was very little, there wasn't so much communication between the two. So you had two sort of separate movements going on. One was leadership of CHABAD Lubavitch worldwide. One was people living in Crown Heights, and one was the Balchuva movement that was new to Crown Heights, and there was a disconnection between those two. And when the Rebbe passed away, that thing blew up to becoming a separate movement of Crown Heights of Lubavitch split in two, which was people in Crown Heights, mainstream Crown Heights, becoming Moshiach, saying that even though the Rebbe passed away, he's still Moshiach, we still have to spread that. And you had the Balchuva movement, which definitely was leaderless, but then the other people took the reign of leadership for them, stepped in after the Rebbe passed away, and coalesced their power by becoming extra strong Moshiach, Rabbi Majeski and other people. And then you had the people that were upstairs, those people were mainly downstairs in 770. Then you have people upstairs in 770, which was heads of Koch, Chabad, whatever, the mainstream Chabad movement, which is led by Rabbi Krinsky, he wasn't a leader, he just had the main power base that the Rebbe left in the will for him to have power. Actually, I think the Rebbe left 3 contradictory wills, and they got rid of all the money also before he passed away. The Rebbe was very clever in the way he left things be. He built a movement that can grow without a base of power that any one person could have power, so it could just continue to grow. The Rebbe knew what he was doing. But you had this upstairs in 770 people who were aligned with, they're called anti-Moshiach. They owned upstairs in 770. They owned the whole place technically, but realistically they had power over upstairs, the building of 770, the main 770 organizations, and also most Chabad shluchim, emissaries, were sort of under that anti-Moshiachist umbrella, which is mainstream Chabad. Because if you ask mainstream Chabad, is the Rebbe still alive? They'll say no. If you ask mainstream Chabad, is the Rebbe still Moshiach? They'll say no. So they'll say no. So you had the split within the neighborhood that after the Rebbe passed away, there was tremendous fights. Sometimes there was hand-to-hand fighting. Sometimes they put up a Yechi sign downstairs, and one guy tore it down, so they were going to beat him up, but they didn't. There was a lot of things going on. There was a community in disarray, a community in mourning. The Rebbe passed away through the leader list. They were trying to figure out what to do. They were not very organized. They were like very ADD. They're very reactionary, but they weren't very organized and efficient, or inefficient. They weren't very organized and focused. They definitely did not have that. They were, compared to other communities, I mean, when Satmar fights, it's like scary. You have two armies clashing with each other. Over here, you had gangs fighting with each other, sort of. I mean, that analogy. But the Chabad emissary, the Shluchim situation continued to grow tremendously. So within the anti-Moshiachist establishment, you had the radicals of that group that came out of a yeshiva in Detroit. They were like defenders of the Rebbe. They were defenders of the Rebbe. They said that they're here to defend the Rebbe's honor, and they will go on shlichus. They will do anything that the Rebbe wanted from them. And they created this like post the Rebbe passing away in 1994, Gimel Tammuz. They created this like passion about going on shlichus. They used to fabring a lot. They weren't very well liked, but they had that effect on different camps and on their idea of shlichus. And that was the radical from, I would guess, left Chabad. I don't know what you call established Chabad. And then the Moshiachistin, which was anti-establishment, had their radicals, which came from Israel. Now, every year you had students for many, many years already, starting in the 60s, I think, in the 70s. You had students that came from Israel for a few years. They're called Kvutza, Gathering of Bachrim. Chabad became a worldwide movement. When you have a worldwide movement, automatically you're going to attract radicals of all kinds and, well, crazies of all kinds. So people that they said, okay, the Rebbe didn't pass away. They took one like movement. They took one quote from the Gemara about Yaakov Avinu lo mes, that basically the idea of Yaakov, the idea of a Jewish leader doesn't pass away as long as his ideas still live on. So they took that idea and said it literally. They said that the Rebbe is not only Moshiach, but the Rebbe is still alive. But they the more and more radical it got, the smaller and smaller the group got. They were called Tzvatnikists. They came from Yeshiva and Tzvas, led by I don't know who. These people were fierce people, fierce. They came from Israel, so they came from a much different culture. They didn't recognize any power base. They literally didn't give a shit. They set up the establishment downstairs in 770. Now, the anti-establishment, mainstream anti-establishment, the Crown Heights people of the Baal Teshuva movement liked these people because they were fighting against the establishment, Krinsky and the people. I keep on saying Krinsky, but it's not really him, it's the establishment from upstairs. So they liked these people. They gave them a little bit of a power base. They recognized them. What happens, and historically this always happens, the radicals get their power and they never leave and they become a problem. So Crown Heights has been in that situation since the Rebbe passed away in 1994. In the beginning, there was terrible fights. Nobody married. If you were a Moshiach family or anti-Moshiach family, you wouldn't marry each other until 2008. Now, till a certain point, people started marrying each other because the whole thing just calmed down and people just didn't care anymore. Most people just didn't care anymore. But you still have this sort of radical faction from Israel that are. A lot of them are just totally out of their mind. A lot of them are violent. They're prone to violence, or they are violent. And if you start up with them, they will physically remove you from 770. Let's just say that. They've been trying to expand. Now, in terms of what happened with the tunnels, basically they decided, okay, we're going to expand 770 downstairs in 770s where the Rebbe was over the years. We're going to make sure that the Rebbe is still there. We think that the Rebbe is still there, even though we don't physically see him. That's our own limitations. We're going to expand 770. Expansion of 770 was spoken about in the 1980s already. They kept on talking. Then Gutnick got involved in the 90s. It never really happened. Nothing really happened. Considering the lack of leadership in Crown Heights, the lack of able to get anything done in Crown Heights. Because it's ironic, because Chabad's known to be like this most efficient, crazy, doing movement, and they're all around the world. But the Rebbe explained about his chassidim. My chassidim are like firefighters. There's an emergency, they'll get up and run. Other chassidim are not like that. They're much more focused and organized. Lubavitch is like, we'll get up and do it. But Lubavitch around the world somehow they created all these centers. They were basically communitarian, warm, passionate Jewish people that offered these Americans that dealt with cold, conservative, and reform and big air-conditioned synagogues with the rabbis talking all this crap. They were offering them a piece of warmth. They were like, hell yeah, we want this. Okay, that's part of the success of Chabad. So they were catering to wealthy Jews that were the liberal individualism. That's American mainstream society of liberal individualism. Chabad was communitarian, well, extremely communitarian. All Hasidic communities, all Orthodox communities are like that. Hasidic communities are very warm. They're very communitarian, so it's something you really want to be a part of. They were offering that to secular American Jews that were liberal individualism, very much more colder lives, less meaningful. Secular American Jews' lives are very meaningless. They're very high in education, but their experience is very cold and they're always yearning for more because Jews essentially are religious in their nature, whether it comes to religion or politics or anything or environment or whatever or any other crazy movement that they got themselves involved with that now turned on them. So about a year or two ago, there was a mikveh that was closed down. They tunneled under the mikveh just to create this basically there was between two buildings, and that's what happened. Now, when the police came, they're going to fight the police. They don't care, or they're going to be proud to be arrested because they don't look at it as they say, listen, we don't care who owns upstairs in Senate 70. We don't care who the leadership of downstairs in Senate 70 is. All we know is that we are here to expand the synagogue and so that's what we're going to do. And it's about 20 or 30 people probably. In the general, they broke off and create their own community of Moshiachistim. They live around Crown Heights. They have their own centers outside 770 as well, a hotel and stuff like that. Most of them are coming from Israel. So again, Judaism in Israel is, I would say, much more real than Judaism in America, much more believing and all that stuff. So they're the radicals from Israel that are Bal Teshuva in Israel coming to Crown Heights. They're not going to respect any laws or any power structure anyway. And plus, a lot of them are just out of their mind. They're just lost people that got there. So they're going to be violent. They're going to be out of their mind. That's what's going on over there. So what ended up happening is that they built this extension to 770. That was a secret because they were going to expand it. They came with the trucks in order to fill it up with cement. They started fighting with them. They called the cops. Cops came down to 770. That's when the famous video happened. So maybe I give you a little bit of background now, and you understand what happened. I probably spoke about ideas. Maybe I didn't come clear with all that stuff. That's what went on. Lubavitch is very embarrassed about what happened. Chabad, mainstream Chabad, mainstream Crownites, people are very embarrassed about what happened. It's only a group of radicals. It is true in that way. Sometimes they blame it on radicals, but it's not true. No one's backing them up. No one's like, oh yeah, it's good that they did this. It's like, yo, this is embarrassing. And other Jews are frankly, other religious Jews are they always jeered at Chabad. They always had this disdain towards Chabad because Chabad is totally dedicated to the Rebbe. There's a lot of disdain between Chabad. There was, till now it's starting to break, but there was a lot of resentment from other Hasidic groups towards Chabad because Chabad always looked down at them, because they spoke English better and they had their Rebbe, even though other Chassidim creamed them in every other way. In other words, other Chassidim help each other out tremendously compared to Chabad. The Chesed is 10 times more than Chabad. Their organizations, the way they do things, quality of life, the financially and everything else, they're much better off than Chabad. But Chabad looks down at them. I don't know why, because they don't speak English so well, or they think because they're Lubavitchers, they're better. So they always have this resentment. So it's starting to fall away, finally, because Lubavitchers are finally starting to realize, because of international travel that chassidim they started realizing the importance of having Chabad movements around the world, started becoming friends with Lubavitchers. Lubavitchers started noticing, hey, there's other groups of chassidus that we had nothing to do with, that we looked down until now. We called them yoilis or whatever. We thought they were better than them, but hey, they're actually better than us in a lot of things that we do. So they started, there's a new movement of the next generation is going to get along with each other and work with each other a lot more. But there's still this resentment towards Chabad. So people are laughing at them and the general Jewish world. Then there's, of course, the conspiracy theories out there, Jewish tunnels, whatever. And you have everyone else that doesn't know what the hell's going on. They just comment on it. So perhaps my video of the background of history, and maybe I'm not sure if there's anything more to talk about. And it was the history of Crown Heights with the area, but that's, for another video. All right. Have a good Shabbos. You know what